In the heart of North America, a quiet but seismic shift is unfolding, one that could reshape the economic and political landscape for generations. It's not waged with bombs or speeches, but with something far more elemental: the soil itself. Canada, the unassuming northern neighbor, holds a trump card in this high-stakes game: a potassium-rich mineral called potash, the lifeblood of global agriculture. Most Americans have never heard of it, yet it underpins the food on their tables, the crops in their fields, and the stability of their grocery bills. As the United States, under President Donald Trump's leadership, swings its tariff hammer with a 35% levy on Canadian goods, Ottawa has chosen not to shout or retaliate with mirrored tariffs. Instead, it's reaching for the throat of American agriculture, subtly tightening its grip on the flow of potash, a move so understated yet so potent that it could bring the world's largest economy to its knees. Potash isn't a household name, but it's a cornerstone of modern farming. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, over half of global food production relies on chemical fertilizers, and potassium, potash's key ingredient, is irreplaceable. It boosts crop yields, fortifies plants against drought and storms, and ensures food security in an era of unpredictable climate. In 2023, the United States consumed 5.3 million tons of potash, but its domestic production barely scraped 400,000 tons, less than 8% of its needs. The rest, over 80%, comes from Canada, a $4.9 billion lifeline flowing from the flatlands of Saskatchewan, home to the world's largest potash reserves. This isn't oil or gas, commodities that grab headlines and spark geopolitical dramas. It's a quiet, granular substance mined from the earth, yet its absence could ripple through America's heartland, doubling the price of lettuce in Iowa or grain in Indiana overnight. When Trump announced his sweeping tariffs on August 1, 2025, targeting Canadian goods with a 35% hike, Canada didn't respond with fiery rhetoric or tit-for-tat duties. Instead, Ottawa's leaders, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, adopted a strategy of calculated restraint. Behind closed doors, they discussed a single devastating countermove: turning off the potash tap. No laws needed, no sanctions required, just a quiet reduction in exports. The implications are staggering. Fertilizer prices would soar, with U.S. farmers facing double-digit cost increases. Industrial agriculture, tethered to potash, would drive up food prices across the board. Corn, the backbone of American farming, could see prices spike by 20 to 25%. Beef, chicken, and dairy might climb 15 to 18%, while leafy greens and root crops like potatoes could surge over 30%, hitting consumers hardest in states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri. America can't turn to Russia or Belarus, the other potash giants, both shackled by heavy sanctions. Canada's grip on this resource is a chokehold, and they know it. This isn't just about potash, though, it's a masterclass in leverage. Trump's tariffs began with steel, a bold 50% levy on Canadian imports signed into law on June 12, 2025, under the guise of national security. The move sent shockwaves through Ontario and Quebec, where hundreds of export contracts were cancelled within days. Steel, the backbone of industry, seemed like a logical target for Trump's protectionist agenda, but Canada didn't take the bait. Instead of retaliating with steel tariffs of their own, Ottawa rolled out a tariff rate quota, TRQ system, a deceptively bland term for a sharp political maneuver. Countries without free trade deals face a cap at 50% of last year's imports, with a 50% tax on anything exceeding that limit. Nations with trade agreements get better terms but still face strict quotas, and any steel linked to China, even if remelted, gets slapped with a separate tax. The result? Canada shielded its trade ties with Europe, boxed out Chinese steel, and left US steel unscathed, for now. It was a signal. We're not closing the door, but we're not backing down. The real counterpunch, however, lies underground. Canada's leaders looked past the headlines and zeroed in on America's farmland, where farmers depend on Canadian potash to keep their fields fertile. Trump's tariffs may hit steel, a replaceable commodity, but Canada's response targets the foundation of society itself, the ability to grow food. If potash exports slow to a trickle, the U.S. fertilizer market could buckle within weeks. The ripple effects would be immediate and brutal, hitting farmers first and consumers soon after. Canada's strategy is as silent as it is devastating, a reminder that the sharpest moves in geopolitics don't always come with a megaphone. While Trump swings wildly, Canada is playing the long game. Ottawa has rolled out a $1 billion package to rebuild its steel industry from the ground up, modernizing production with electric arc furnace technology that slashes carbon emissions and aligns with global sustainability goals. An additional $70 million is earmarked for worker training, supporting 10,000 laid-off steelworkers, while $150 million in extended loans bolsters steel-dependent towns. This isn't just damage control, it's a reinvention. Canada is positioning itself as a leader in low-carbon steel, a commodity in high demand from markets like Europe and Japan, where environmental standards are non-negotiable. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, 52% of steel companies plan to adopt hydrogen-based technology to cut emissions, and Canada is ahead of the curve. By investing in cleaner production, Ottawa is securing a competitive edge that could outlast the current trade war. Beyond steel, Canada is quietly building escape hatches from its reliance on the U.S. market. A $40 billion liquefied natural gas project in British Columbia just shipped its first load to East Asia, cutting delivery times to Japan in half compared to routes from the Gulf of Mexico. A new oil pipeline, nearing completion, will send Canadian crude straight to the Pacific, bypassing U.S. refineries entirely. These moves aren't just economic, they're strategic. Canada is diversifying its trade partners, forging stronger ties with Europe, Asia, and ASEAN nations, and reducing its dependence on a volatile neighbor. Prime Minister Carney's approach is disciplined. No emotional outbursts, no reckless taxes, just calibrated pressure. Intelligence cooperation with the U.S. continues, missile defense remains intact, and a proposed digital services tax is on hold, for now. Canada isn't burning bridges, it's building new ones. The contrast with Trump's approach couldn't be sharper. His tariffs, now expanded to 14 countries including Japan, South Korea, and South Africa, are a blunt instrument, driven by a desire to curb trade imbalances and counter China's influence. On July 7, 2025, Trump announced a 40% tariff on these nations, citing fairness in trade balances. South Korea scrambled to negotiate before the August 1st deadline, facing a potential 25% tariff if no deal is reached. Japan's Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, called an urgent cabinet meeting, decrying Washington's unreasonable unilateral decision while vowing to protect national interests. South Africa's president labeled Trump's move authoritarian and unsupported by data, noting that 77% of U.S. goods enter their market tariff-free. These nations aren't just frustrated, they're re-evaluating their reliance on the U.S. as a stable partner. Back home, the consequences of Trump's tariffs are already biting. The 50% levy on Canadian steel has sent shockwaves through the U.S. auto industry, where steel frames for pickup trucks are now 6 to 9% more expensive. Supply chains are creaking, and factories in Ohio and Michigan, already stretched thin, face potential shift cuts or shutdowns. Nissan, holding a 5.7% share of the U.S. auto market, halted production of 3 models for the Canadian market at plants in Tennessee and Mississippi, citing part shortages. The ripple effects are felt beyond manufacturing. Copper futures surged 17% in a single day after Trump's 50% tariff on imported copper, a record high that will raise costs for electronics, automobiles, construction, and energy. For consumers, new car prices have climbed $2,000 to $10,000, a heavy burden for households with an average monthly income of $4,191. Used car prices are surging too, squeezing low- and middle-income families who bear the brunt of these regressive taxes. The instability doesn't stop there. Republican senators have warned that tariffs could disrupt supply chains for U.S. defense contractors, who rely on steady access to steel and aluminum. A shortage here could hamper production of critical equipment, threatening both economic and national security. The broader economy is feeling the strain too. The constant escalation of trade policies has created an environment of uncertainty, spooking investors and businesses wary of unpredictable costs and market access. Economists warn that unchecked tariffs could fuel inflation, forcing the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates and potentially tipping the U.S. into recession. The $8.7 billion annual cost of Trump's tariffs is already driving up prices, costing jobs, and fracturing supply chains, leaving Americans to foot the bill for a trade war few understand. Canada, meanwhile, is turning adversity into opportunity. The trade war has been a wake-up call, forcing Ottawa to confront its over-reliance on the U.S. market. Prime Minister Carney has announced a sweeping realignment of Canada's economic, foreign, and defense policies, aiming to build a more self-reliant nation. This includes removing trade and labor barriers between provinces to create a more dynamic domestic market, as well as intensifying trade negotiations with Europe, the Indo-Pacific, and even China, now the top market for Canadian oil exports. Canada's agricultural sector, already surpassing the US as the world's leading food exporter, is seeing rising export value, further bolstering its global standing. These reforms won't bear fruit overnight, but the momentum is undeniable. If successful, Canada could emerge from this trade war with a more diversified, resilient economy, less vulnerable to the political whims of its neighbor. The contrast in leadership styles is stark. Trump's approach is brash, driven by instinct and a desire to project strength. His tariffs are a gamble, aimed at forcing concessions but risking economic fallout at home. Canada's response, by contrast, is surgical, leveraging its control over critical resources like potash to apply pressure without fanfare. Ottawa's silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. By holding potash hostage, Canada is betting that the math will force Trump to blink. If fertilizer prices spike, Trump's rural base, farmers in states like Iowa and Nebraska, will feel the pain first. If oil and gas exports are rerouted, refineries in the Midwest and Northeast will face delays and cost overruns. If Chinese steel can't flow through Canada, US manufacturers will pay more or halt production. This isn't sabotage, it's a calculated push to bring Trump's tariffs down to 8 to 10%, particularly for autos, metals, and energy. The stakes are higher than a single trade dispute. The North American Economic Alliance, a cornerstone of stability for 3 decades, is showing cracks. If potash stops flowing, if steel shortages cripple factories, the alliance could face its first real fracture. This isn't just a tariff standoff, it's a test of whether two neighbors can navigate a new era of economic nationalism without tearing apart the ties that bind them. For the US, the costs are already mounting. Higher prices, strained supply chains, and a growing sense of isolation as allies like Japan and South Korea question their reliance on Washington. For Canada, the trade war is a chance to redefine its place in the world, not as a junior partner, but as a global player with the leverage to shape outcomes. The question now is, who blinks first? Trump's tariffs are a high-stakes bet, but Canada's response is a masterstroke of restraint and precision. Potash may not make headlines, but its absence could reshape the American economy in ways that steel tariffs never could. As August 1st looms, the world watches not for explosions or ultimatums, but for the quiet, relentless pressure of a nation that knows the power of the soil beneath its feet.